At dinner, my granddaughter looked me dead in the eye and said, "You're just a broke old man, Grandpa. Uncle Wade actually built something with his life." I didn't say a word. 10 days later, that same Uncle Wade didn't have a job, didn't have a truck, and didn't have a roof over his head that wasn't mine. And that same night, my daughter called me crying so hard I could barely understand her. My name is Harold Whitfield. I'm 64 years old, and I live on 40 acres just outside Bozeman, Montana, in the same farmhouse my father built with his own hands back in 1958. I own a construction supply and equipment rental company I started when I was 26, back when all I had was one flatbed trailer and a line of credit my father co-signed against this very land. You'd never guess any of that looking at me. I still wear the same canvas work jackets I've worn for 30 years. I still drive a truck with 210,000 miles on it. And I have never, not once in my life, talked about money at a family dinner table. My granddaughter Emma is 14. She's my daughter Kayla's girl. And ever since Kayla's divorce 4 years ago, Emma has lived with her mother in town, about 20 minutes from the farm. Every single Sunday, rain or snow or blistering heat, I drive in and take Emma to lunch. It's been that way since she was 10 years old. Since right after the divorce, when Kayla asked me to just be steady for her, to be the one thing that didn't change. I never missed a Sunday. Not for a broken hip 2 years ago. Not for a blizzard that shut down half the county. Not for anything. That particular Sunday started out exactly like every other one before it. By the end of it, though, everything between me and the man my daughter had led into our family had changed for good. And it changed because of 11 words a 14-year-old girl said to me over a plate of fried chicken. Kayla and her ex-husband Danny were married for 9 years before it fell apart, and it wasn't some big dramatic collapse either. It was quieter than that, the way most real heartbreak actually is. Danny wanted a different kind of life than the one Kayla could give him, working as a hospital scheduler, and he found that life somewhere else, eventually. I never said a bad word about him in front of Emma, not once, even when I wanted to. When the dust settled, Kayla started rebuilding on her own, working double shifts some weeks just to keep Emma in her same school. And I did what a father does. I paid off her car so she wouldn't have that hanging over her. I covered the gap when the insurance came up short after Emma's appendix surgery. I never made a show of any of it, and I never told Kayla to thank me, because in my mind, that's just what family does for family. You show up. You don't announce it. About 2 years after the divorce, Kayla met a man named Wade Preston at a gym she'd started going to on her lunch breaks. Wade was 38, ran some kind of online fitness coaching business, and from everything Emma told me over our Sunday lunches, Wade always had a new truck, new gear, new stories about clients paying him thousands of dollars for personalized workout plans. He talked a lot about building an empire and not working for anybody. Kayla married him about a year after they started dating, and Emma took to him fast, the way kids sometimes do with the loud, exciting new person in the house. I never said one negative thing about Wade to Emma, not when she came home repeating his phrases about grinding and levels of success, not when she started rolling her eyes a little at my quiet way of doing things. I told myself a 14-year-old comparing two men was normal, and that it didn't matter what she thought of me, as long as I never stopped showing up. Our arrangement with Kayla gave her the school weeks, and gave me every Sunday for lunch. No exceptions, going back 4 years running. I never once made Kayla feel guilty about anything from the divorce, even though my late wife, before she passed, used to tell me I let people walk over me too easily by staying so quiet about what I actually had and what I actually did for this family behind the scenes. Looking back on it now, I think that same quiet nature of mine is exactly what let a man like Wade Preston walk into my daughter's kitchen and start rewriting the story of what real strength and real success were supposed to look like in front of my own granddaughter. That Sunday, Kayla texted me and asked if Wade could join us for lunch since he said he wanted to finally get some real time with me. I said, of course, because I never wanted Emma feeling like there was some Cold War happening between the grown men in her life. We met at a barbecue place Wade picked out himself, a newer spot downtown with exposed brick and a menu that cost about twice what the food was worth. Wade showed up in athletic gear that probably cost more than my truck payment, shook my hand hard enough to make a point of it, and spent the first 10 minutes of lunch talking about a new client who'd just signed up for his 6-month transformation package. Emma sat there just glowing, laughing at everything he said, nodding along like every word coming out of his mouth was scripture. About halfway through the meal, the conversation drifted, the way it does, to what everybody had been up to that week. I mentioned, just in passing, that I'd been busy closing a big equipment rental contract with a construction outfit building a new subdivision outside town. Nothing I made a big deal of, just regular talk. Wade jumped right in over me and started going on about a testimonial video. One of his clients posted how he was thinking about buying a second truck for brand visibility, how his coach called him one of the fastest growing names in the whole online fitness space. Emma was hanging on every single word of it. And then, out of nowhere, she turned and looked straight at me and said it loud enough that the whole table, and probably the two families sitting next to us, could hear every syllable. You're just a broke old man, Grandpa. Uncle Wade actually built something with his life. The table went dead silent. Kayla's face drained white as a bedsheet. Wade suddenly found his brisket very interesting and stared down at his plate like it held the answer to something. I just sat there a second, looking at my granddaughter, and I felt something shift hard and cold inside my chest, but I made sure none of it showed on my face. A server walked by right at that moment and refilled our sweet teas like absolutely nothing had happened. And for a second, the only sound at that table was ice clinking against glass. Wade finally looked up, gave this small, awkward little smile, like he wasn't sure whether he should laugh or step in, and then just went back to his plate. Kayla opened her mouth like she was about to say something to Emma, then closed it again and reached for her tea, instead of actually saying a single word to her daughter. I noticed all of it, every little piece, and I filed every bit of it away without letting 1 ounce of it show. I could have said plenty right then and there. I could have told Emma exactly what I built from one flatbed trailer, how many families in this county depend on paychecks from my company, how much I'm actually worth compared to a man selling workout plans out of his garage. I could have taken Wade apart right there at that table with facts he had no idea I was sitting on, but I didn't say any of that. I just looked at my granddaughter and said, "Okay, sweetheart, eat your lunch before it gets cold." And I changed the subject to her volleyball season. Kayla tried to jump in late and tell Emma that wasn't a kind thing to say to her grandfather, but it came out weak, half-hearted, like some part of her agreed more than she wanted to admit. Wade never said one word to correct Emma either. He just sat there looking mighty pleased with himself, like he'd won some kind of trophy. The rest of lunch went by quiet. I paid the check like I always did, hugged Emma goodbye, told her I loved her and I'd see her next Sunday, same as always. I drove home with the radio off, no sound at all except my granddaughter's voice looping over and over in my head. You're just a broke old man. I wasn't angry at Emma. She's 14, and kids repeat what gets praised around them, what gets celebrated at the dinner table. But I was done being quiet about certain things. Not to punish my granddaughter, because I realized that night that I had let people believe a story about me that wasn't true, and I had let that story sit there collecting dust for entirely too long. What Emma didn't know, what Kayla didn't know, and what Wade Preston certainly had no idea about, was just how much of their entire life was actually resting on my shoulders without a single one of them ever realizing it. And that Sunday night, sitting alone in my farmhouse kitchen with the lights off, I decided it was finally time they found out. Here's something I never once brought up at that table, or any table. 38 years ago, I started my company with one used flatbed trailer, and a loan my own father co-signed against this farm. By the time Kayla was grown and married and divorced, that company had turned into something with real weight behind it, supplying equipment and materials to contractors building out half of this county. I kept it quiet on purpose. I never wanted Emma growing up thinking money was the whole point of a person, and I never wanted anybody deciding I owed them more than what I already freely gave. But here's the part that mattered most. A year before Kayla even married Wade, she'd called me asking for a favor on his behalf. Wade had some old business debt from a gym franchise that folded on him, and his credit was wrecked because of it. So he needed someone to co-sign a loan for a new truck, since he said he needed something reliable to drive clients to sessions and haul his equipment around. I agreed, quietly, for Kayla's sake and for Emma's, and my name went right on that loan as the backup signer. Around that same stretch of time, my property manager, a fellow named Dale who runs a rental company I own called Gallatin Valley Properties, found Kayla and Wade a house on the west side of town, a nice little rental with a big backyard Emma loved. I never asked who the tenants were going to be. Dale never mentioned it either, not until months later when I happened to glance at a report and saw the address and put together exactly whose names were sitting on that lease. And on top of all of that, the gym where Wade rented studio space to run his in-person training sessions 3 days a week happened to lease that entire building from a commercial property group that, as it turned out, did all its concrete and equipment business through my company. A relationship worth a real amount of steady income every single year. None of them knew a lick of any of this. Not Kayla, not Wade, not Emma. I had never once used any piece of it, had never even seriously thought about using it, until that Sunday night at the barbecue place. I got home a little after 8 that evening and sat at my kitchen table a long while without switching on a single light. I kept replaying Emma's voice in my head, the easy, careless way she'd said, "Broke old man." Like it was just a plain fact everybody at that table had already quietly agreed to. I wasn't plotting anything wild, and I want to be clear about that part. I wasn't out to destroy anybody's life out of spite. But I realized I had spent a full year quietly propping up a man who turned around and used that very stability to look pleased with himself, while my own granddaughter called me broke to my face. That didn't sit right with me. Not anymore. The next morning, I called my accountant, a woman named Sharon who's handled my books going on 15 years now, and asked her to gather everything tied to the loan I'd co-signed and the rental property both. I also called Dale over at the property company and asked him to send me the full lease details on that house. I wasn't loud about a single bit of it, and I never raised my voice once on any of those calls that day. I was simply asking questions I probably should have asked a long time before that Sunday. Questions like why I was still sitting as a co-signer on a truck loan for a man who clearly, by his own bragging, didn't need my help anymore. By that afternoon, I had the full picture laid out in front of me, exactly what I was tangled up in, and exactly how each piece could be unwound, if that's what I decided to do. I sat on all of it one more night before making a single move, because I wanted to be dead certain I wasn't acting purely out of anger. By Monday morning, I wasn't angry anymore. I was just finished. Tuesday, I called Dale first thing. I asked him plainly what the lease situation looked like on that rental house. He told me it was actually up for renewal at the end of that very month, since it ran on a one-year term set to roll over automatically unless the owner said otherwise. I told him not to renew it. I told him to send the standard non-renewal notice required under Montana law, giving them their full legal notice window. Nothing shady about it. Nothing even remotely illegal. Just a property owner making a simple decision not to continue a lease. Dale didn't ask me why. He just said he'd have the notice drafted and mailed out that same afternoon. I remember sitting at my desk after that call, feeling something I couldn't quite name. Not satisfaction, exactly. More like the feeling of finally shutting a door that had been left hanging open for far too long. Kayla had no idea that house belonged to me in any way. As far as she knew, they'd found that rental through a regular online listing and worked out a fair deal without ever meeting the actual owner, which happens all the time with property management companies handling homes for owners who prefer to keep their names off the public side of things. That's precisely why I set the whole business up that way years ago, to keep business and family strictly apart. I also told Dale to keep every piece of it strictly by the book. Exact notice period, exact required wording, nothing rushed, nothing that could ever come back on me as unfair or improper. I wanted it handled clean, the same way I've run every single part of my company for 38 years, because I never wanted to hand anybody a reason to say I'd done something wrong. Dale confirmed it was all standard procedure, said it happens constantly when owners simply choose not to renew, and that was that. Just paperwork to him. To me, it was the first honest thing I'd done about that house in over a year. Wednesday, I called Sharon about the truck loan. She confirmed exactly what I'd already suspected, that Wade's credit had never actually recovered, the way all his talk about clients and six-figure months probably had people assuming. My name sitting on that loan as cosigner was the only reason the bank had approved him a year earlier at a decent rate to begin with. Sharon explained that if I formally requested to be removed as cosigner, the lender is required to reassess the loan strictly on the primary borrower's credit alone, and if he doesn't qualify without that backup, the bank can call the balance due or demand he refinance the whole thing on his own within a set window. I told Sharon to file the request that same day. This wasn't any loophole or dirty trick. It's just how cosigned loans work, plain and simple, and any bank will tell a person the exact same thing. By Thursday morning, the lender had already reached out directly to Wade, letting him know his cosigner had been removed and that he had a short window to either pay off the balance in full or refinance under his own name using his own credit. I only found out about that part later, but at the time, all I knew was that the gears were finally turning. I sat in my office that Thursday afternoon and felt no urge whatsoever to check up on any of it. I wasn't sitting on the sidelines waiting to watch the man sweat, I just went about my regular work, checking on deliveries, going over invoices, same as any other week of my life. The difference was, for the first time in over a year, I wasn't quietly holding somebody else's whole life together while getting nothing back but disrespect for the trouble. And that alone felt like plenty. Thursday afternoon, I made one more call, this time to a man named Kurt Delaney, who owns the commercial building where Wade rented his studio space. Kurt and I had done steady business together for close to 12 years, ever since my company started supplying concrete and materials for his property developments around the valley. Every year, my company handled a sizable chunk of work through Kurt's holdings, the kind of steady business that genuinely matters to a man's yearly numbers. Kurt always dealt with me personally because of how much that relationship was worth to him. I called him just to check in, nothing dramatic about it, and somewhere in that conversation he mentioned, almost offhand, that one of his tenants, some fitness fellow, had been late on studio rent twice that quarter and was already on thin ice with the building manager. I didn't say a single word about co-signed loans or rental houses. Didn't need to. I simply mentioned, in a calm, ordinary tone, that with everything going on in my personal life lately, I'd been thinking about shifting some of my concrete and materials business to a different developer for the next contract cycle. Kurt asked straight out if there was anything he could do to keep the account. I told him honestly it wasn't about him at all. It was just time for a change. That conversation alone put pressure right back on Wade from a direction he never once saw coming, because building managers pay close attention to which tenants are struggling and which ones aren't, and Wade had been quietly riding on a studio lease that was already teetering before I ever made that call. Kurt rang me back about an hour later, said he'd spoken with his building manager, and mentioned, almost apologetic about it, that the fitness tenants account was already flagged for review regardless of anything I did. I told him I appreciated him being straight with me, and that whatever he decided about his tenants was entirely his own business, not mine. By Friday, things started moving fast on Wade's end, faster than even I expected. Emma called me Friday evening, sounding confused, saying Wade had been on the phone all day looking stressed out of his mind, and that her mother kept telling her everything was fine, even though she clearly looked worried sick. I kept my voice calm and steady with Emma, told her that grown-up things get complicated sometimes, and asked her about her volleyball tournament instead. I wasn't about to put any of this weight on my granddaughter, no matter what happened next. That same night, Kayla texted asking if I'd heard anything about trouble with their rental house, since she'd gotten a notice in the mail about the lease not renewing. I told her I hadn't heard a thing, which was true enough in the sense that I hadn't heard about her actually receiving it, even though I already knew it was on its way. She said something about how strange the timing was, getting hit with a lease non-renewal and some bank trouble over Wade's truck loan in the very same week. I told her that did sound stressful, and left it right there. I want to be honest here. Sitting on that information without saying a word felt strange to me, genuinely strange. But I also kept remembering that same dinner table a week earlier, listening to my own granddaughter call me a broke old man, while the two grown adults responsible for raising her said absolutely nothing to correct it. So I let that week keep moving exactly the way it was already moving, without pushing it any further, and without lifting one single finger to slow any of it down either. Saturday morning, Emma called me crying, which almost never happens with that girl. She said a tow truck had shown up early that morning and hauled Wade's truck right off the driveway while the neighbors stood there watching the whole thing. Wade had apparently missed his refinancing window with the bank, and once that window closed, the loan went into default and the lender exercised its right to repossess, which is standard practice with vehicle loans everywhere in this country when terms aren't met. Emma said Wade was out in the driveway yelling at people on the phone, and her mother was crying in the kitchen, and she didn't understand what was happening to their whole family all at once. I told Emma that sometimes, when a person spends money faster than they actually make it, everything catches up all at once, and that none of it was anything she needed to carry on her own shoulders. I asked if she was okay, and she said she was just scared because everybody in that house was so upset. I told her I loved her, that whatever was happening with the grown-ups had nothing to do with her, and that I would always, always be there no matter what happened around her. After I hung up, I sat with my phone in my hand a long while, thinking about how just 1 week before, that same driveway had Wade's brand new truck sitting there gleaming while he bragged about it clear through lunch. Now it sat empty, and the man who called himself a self-made success in front of my granddaughter was standing in that same driveway hollering at a tow truck driver just doing his job. I felt for Emma having to watch all of that. Genuinely felt for her, because none of it was ever supposed to touch her directly. But I also knew, deep down, that kids remember moments like that far longer than they remember any lecture. And something told me Emma was already starting to see things a good deal clearer than she had a week before at that barbecue place. By Sunday afternoon, the same day I was set to pick up Emma for our regular lunch, Kayla called me, and she sounded like an entirely different person than her usual confident self. She said the property company had confirmed the lease truly wasn't renewing, that they needed to be out inside the legal notice window, and with Wade's truck gone and his studio lease apparently on shaky ground too, she didn't have the first idea where they were going to go. Then she said something that told me she'd finally connected every dot. She said Dale, the property manager, had mentioned in passing that the owner of the house went by Gallatin Valley Properties. And when Kayla looked it up out of pure curiosity, some public filing had my name attached right there as the registered owner behind that company. Her voice cracked hard when she asked me straight out if I owned that house they'd been living in for over a year. I didn't deny one word of it. I told her the truth, calm, the same way I'd handled every single call that whole week. I told her yes, I owned it through that company, had for years, long before she and Wade ever moved a single box into it, and that neither Dale nor I had known who the tenants would be until it was already done and settled. She went quiet a moment, and then she asked the question I already knew was coming. She asked if any of what was happening, the lease, the truck, Wade's studio trouble, had anything to do with me. I could hear Emma in the background asking her mother what was wrong, and I could hear the panic underneath Kayla's voice, even as she tried her best to sound steady for her daughter's sake. For a second, I almost felt sorry for her. Standing in a house that had never really belonged to her to begin with, holding a phone while her whole world tilted sideways in a single afternoon. But then I remembered that same house, that same family, sitting there quiet as church a week earlier, while my granddaughter called me a broke old man to my face, and the sympathy I felt only stretched so far. I answered her honest and plain. I told her I hadn't done one illegal or sneaky thing in the whole business. I had simply stopped quietly holding up parts of their life that were never actually supposed to be my responsibility in the first place, especially after watching my own granddaughter call me broke at a dinner table while she and Wade said absolutely nothing to correct it. Kayla went silent on her end of the phone a good long while. When she finally spoke again, her voice was shaking, and she said she never knew Wade's truck loan had my name sitting on it, that he'd never told her the real story of how he'd gotten approved a year before. She said she also never once realized that house connected back to me, and that if she'd known any bit of it, she never would have let Emma say what she said at that table without stopping her cold. I told her I believed every word of that, and I meant it, because Kayla has never once been a cruel person in her life, just someone who sometimes doesn't look close enough at the folks she chooses to trust. She asked me, near begging by that point, if there was anything I could do to help, since they now had nowhere to live inside a couple weeks, and Wade's whole situation was falling apart at the same time. I told her honestly that the lease decision and the loan business were already moving through normal, legal, and financial channels, and that I wasn't in any position to just reverse things I'd already handed over to my accountant and my property manager. I told her I was sorry she was scared, but that none of this had ever really been about her. She stayed quiet on the line a long moment, and I could tell she was hunting for some argument that might change my mind. There wasn't one, and some part of her already knew that, plain as day. Before we hung up, I told her the one thing I actually cared about, saying out loud. I told her that whatever happened between her and Wade going forward, none of it was going to change one single thing about my Sunday lunches with Emma, and that she didn't need to worry about that part at all. Not ever. I still picked Emma up that Sunday for our regular lunch, because whatever was happening between the grown folks, I wasn't about to break the one thing that hadn't wavered in 4 straight years. We went to a little diner near her school this time, plainer than the barbecue place, no exposed brick or overpriced menu, just a booth by the front window. Emma was unusually quiet the whole ride over, and about halfway through her grilled cheese, she finally asked me straight out if all the trouble at her mother's house had anything to do with me. I figured she'd earned the truth, told in a way a 14-year-old could actually understand. I told her that a year back, I'd helped Wade get a truck loan because her mother asked me to, and that I also happened to own the house they'd been renting, though none of us realized that connection until just recently. I told her plainly that I'd decided to stop helping out with those things after she called me a broke old man at lunch in front of Wade, a man who never said one word to correct her. Emma's face went pale, and she set her sandwich down slow. She said she didn't know any of that, and that she'd only said what she said because Wade was always talking about his clients and his numbers, and it made my quiet, ordinary life seem small next to all that. I told her I understood. I told her that being loud about money doesn't make a single person successful, and that showing up every Sunday for 4 straight years, paying every bill that ever came due, and never once saying an unkind word about her mother, that was the real measure of a man, even if nobody ever mentioned it at a dinner table. Emma got quiet again, and then she said she was sorry, real quiet, real serious, the kind of sorry that actually carries some weight behind it. 2 weeks later, Kayla and Emma moved into a smaller place across town. One Kayla found entirely on her own this time, with no connection to me or any company of mine. Wade lost his studio lease about 10 days after that Sunday lunch, and last I heard through Emma, he'd moved back in with his own folks somewhere out past Billings, and Kayla never went with him. I never once gloated about any of it, not to Kayla, not to Emma, and certainly not to Wade, who I never spoke a single word to again after that barbecue dinner. Emma comes out to the farm most Saturdays now, instead of just our Sunday lunches, an arrangement Kayla asked for herself once things had settled down some. She's never once called me broke again, though honestly, I never needed her to take it back for my own sake. I did what I did so she'd understand something that actually matters in this life, that the quiet, steady people are usually the ones holding everything together, even when nobody's clapping for it or writing it down anywhere for anyone to see. Before that Saturday lunch ended, I sat her down proper and told her plain that what she'd said at that table wasn't just careless, it was cruel. And cruel words don't get erased just because somebody's sorry after the fact. She needed to hear that from me directly, not just feel it in how the week unfolded around her. She nodded and cried a little, and I let her, because some lessons are supposed to sting a bit on their way in. Some evenings now, Emma and I just sit out on the porch after supper, not talking about much of anything, and that's plenty enough for me. I built my whole life around showing up, not showing off, and it took one careless comment over fried chicken to finally show my own granddaughter the real difference between those two things. Kayla and I still talk regular when it comes to Emma's school, and her doctor visits kept simple and respectful, nothing more than what a good family relationship needs to look like. She never brought up that house or that loan again after our one phone call, and honestly, neither did I. If you've stayed with me clear through to the end of this one, I'd be grateful if you hit that subscribe button, because there's plenty more where this came from. Real families, real situations, and real quiet victories that nobody sees coming until they've already arrived.